My name is Catherine Brennan. I'm 59 years old. When my father died in March 2023, I expected grief. What I got instead was a letter from an attorney I'd never met, informing me that everything, the house, the business, the investments, 43 years of accumulated wealth, had been left to a woman named Vanessa Cortez. I'd never heard that name before. She was 34 years old. She'd been living in my childhood home for 3 years. She had a will dated 11 months before his death that left her everything and me nothing. The will was signed while my father was on medications for dementia. I know because I have his medical records. I'm a healthcare attorney. I specialize in elder law and estate litigation. I know exactly what undue influence looks like. And I know exactly how to freeze assets, challenge a will, and drag someone through 2 years of legal hell until they settle for pennies. But before I tell you about the day I walked into probate court with 14 banker's boxes of evidence and a handwriting expert on retainer, let me tell you about the certified letter that changed everything. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where the legal system is slow, but it never forgets. If you're new here, this is about the daughter who lost her inheritance to a stranger and used every tool in the law to get it back. Stick around, hit subscribe. This one's about patience, evidence, and why you should never underestimate someone who knows the system. Let's get into it. I grew up in Scottsdale, Arizona. Desert heat, Red Rock Mountains in the distance, the kind of suburb where every house had a pool and a 2-car garage. My father, Thomas Patrick Brennan, owned a commercial HVAC company, Brennan Climate Solutions. He started it in 1979 with a Ford F-150 pickup truck, a toolbox he'd inherited from his father, and a $12,000 business loan from Valley National Bank. By the time I graduated high school in 1983, he had 12 employees and service contracts with half the hotels in Phoenix. By the time I graduated law school in 1990, he had 40 employees and annual revenue of $3.2 million. My mother, Claire, ran the business side. She was the bookkeeper, the office manager, the person who made sure invoices went out and paychecks cleared. She worked from a home office on the second floor of our house on Desert Vista Drive, a 4-bedroom ranch-style home with a pool shaped like a kidney bean and a view of Camelback Mountain. I was an only child. My parents had wanted more kids, but it didn't happen. So I got all their attention, all their pressure, all their dreams. I went to Arizona State University for undergrad, pre-law track, then University of Arizona College of Law in Tucson. I graduated in 1990, passed the bar exam on my first attempt, and joined a firm in Phoenix called Whitmore & Associates, healthcare law, medical malpractice defense, hospital regulatory compliance, physician licensing issues. I worked there for 8 years before going out on my own in 1998. I opened Catherine Brennan Law, PLLC. I shifted my focus to elder law, estate planning, guardianship cases, Medicaid planning, probate litigation. I'd seen too many families torn apart over money and inheritance. I wanted to help people navigate those minefields before they became disasters. By 2023, I had a solo practice in Tempe with 2 paralegals and a caseload of about 60 active clients. I helped adult children protect their aging parents from scams. I helped families challenge predatory guardians. I helped people understand what undue influence looked like. I never thought I'd be dealing with it in my own family. My mother died in October 2017, ovarian cancer, stage 4 by the time they found it. She fought for 11 months. She died at home with hospice care, my father holding one hand and me holding the other. After she died, my father changed. He pulled inward. He stopped answering the phone as often. He stopped coming to Sunday dinners at my house. When I'd visit him, he'd be polite but distant, like he was going through the motions. I thought it was grief. I thought he needed time. I gave him space. I called once a week. I visited once a month. I invited him to holidays. Sometimes he came. Sometimes he didn't. In 2021, I started noticing things. He'd repeat stories he just told me 5 minutes earlier. He'd forget appointments. He'd call me by my mother's name. I suggested he see a doctor. He got angry. He said there was nothing wrong with him, that I was overreacting, that he was fine. I didn't push. I should have, but I didn't. My father was 81 years old when he died. March 14, 2023. Heart attack. Sudden. He collapsed in the garage of his house on a Tuesday morning. A neighbor named Ruth Castillo found him at 9:30 a.m. when she came over to drop off mail that had been delivered to her house by mistake. Paramedics arrived. They tried to resuscitate him. He was pronounced dead at Scottsdale Osborne Medical Center at 11:47 a.m. I got the call at 12:30 p.m. I was in my office reviewing a guardianship petition. The hospital chaplain told me. Her name was Sister Margaret. She was kind, calm, professional. She asked if I wanted time before coming to identify the body. I said no. I drove to the hospital. I identified him. I signed the papers they gave me. I called the funeral home. I called my father's business partner. I did everything you're supposed to do when a parent dies. The funeral was on March 18th. Small, 30 people. Business associates, a few neighbors, my father's golf buddies. I gave a eulogy. I talked about his work ethic, his love for my mother, his pride in building something from nothing. I thought the hard part was over. On March 21st, I received a certified letter. I had to sign for it. The return address said Pryor and Associates, Attorneys at Law, Tucson, Arizona. I didn't recognize the name. I opened it in my kitchen. The letter was printed on heavy, cream-colored paper with a letterhead that looked expensive. It was addressed to me, Ms. Catherine E. Brennan. The letter informed me that my father's last will and testament was being filed for probate in Pima County Superior Court. It stated that the estate's primary beneficiary was Vanessa Marie Cortez, DOB April 14, 1989. It stated that I was not named in the will. It stated that if I had questions, I should contact Douglas Pryor, Esquire, at the number listed below. I read the letter 3 times. I checked the envelope to make sure it was addressed to me. It was. Vanessa Marie Cortez. I'd never heard that name in my life. Born 1989. I did the math. 34 years old. 47 years younger than my father. I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the letter until the words blurred. Then I opened my laptop. I pulled up LexisNexis, the legal research database every attorney uses. I ran a full background check on Vanessa Marie Cortez. Current address, 4782 Desert Vista Drive, Scottsdale, Arizona. That was my father's address. The house I grew up in. The house where my mother died. This woman had been living in my family home. Before I keep going, I need to ask you something. Have you ever had someone you loved completely erase you? Have you ever discovered a secret so big it rewrote your entire understanding of your family? If you have, drop a comment. I read every one. I called Douglas Pryor's office the next morning. A receptionist answered, professional voice, chipper. She said, Pryor and Associates, how may I direct your call? I said, this is Catherine Brennan. I received a letter regarding the estate of Thomas Brennan. I need to speak with Mr. Pryor. She said, Mr. Pryor is in court this morning. May I take a message? I said, tell him I'm an attorney. Tell him I'm the decedent's daughter. Tell him I'll be filing a petition to contest that will within 48 hours. There was a pause. Then she said, I'll make sure he gets the message. I hung up. I sat at my desk. I pulled out a legal pad. I started making a list of everything I needed. Death certificate, medical records, financial statements, business documents, property records. Then I drove to Scottsdale. I had a key to my father's house. My mother had given it to me years ago, back when she was alive and I'd come over to help with things. I hadn't used it in months. My father and I had become so distant that I always called before visiting, and he'd meet me at the door. I arrived at the house at 10:45 a.m. The driveway was empty. I parked on the street. I walked up the concrete path to the front door. The desert sun was already hot. The air smelled like creosote and dust. I unlocked the door. I stepped inside. The house smelled wrong. Not bad, just wrong. Vanilla candles, a sweet artificial scent my mother would have hated. She'd always used unscented everything because she was sensitive to fragrances. The living room looked the same, but different. Same furniture, the brown leather couch my parents had bought in 2003, the oak coffee table my father had built himself. But there were new things. Throw pillows in bright colors, a ceramic vase on the mantel, framed photos I didn't recognize. I walked into the kitchen. 2 coffee mugs sat in the sink. One said World's Best Dad in blue letters. The other said V in script. V. Vanessa. I opened the refrigerator. Almond milk, kombucha, vegan cheese, quinoa salad in the glass container. My father had drunk whole milk his entire life. He'd eaten steak and potatoes and cheddar cheese. I went upstairs. The hallway was the same beige carpet, same family photos on the walls. But when I opened the door to my parents' bedroom, everything was different. The bed had a new comforter, floral pattern, bright colors. My mother had always used solid colors, navy, gray, cream. I opened the closet. My father's clothes were on the left side, same as always. But the right side, where my mother's clothes used to hang, was filled with women's clothing. Dresses, jeans, blouses, shoes lined up on the floor, size 6. On the nightstand was a framed photograph. My father and a woman. She was young, maybe mid-30s, long dark hair, pretty face. They were on a beach somewhere, palm trees in the background. My father had his arm around her shoulders. They were both smiling. I picked up the frame. On the back, written in silver Sharpie, Tom and Vanessa, Cabo San Lucas, February 2019. February 2019. 16 months after my mother died. I set the photo down. My hands were shaking. I opened the nightstand drawer. Inside, reading glasses, a book, a checkbook, and a prescription bottle. I picked up the bottle. Donepezil 10 milligrams, prescribed by Dr. Harold Morrison, Neurology Associates of Scottsdale, dated January 2022. Donepezil. I knew what that was. It's prescribed for dementia, Alzheimer's disease. My father had never told me he'd been diagnosed with dementia. I took a photo of the prescription label with my phone. Then I went to his home office. The desk was covered with papers, mail, bills, sticky notes. I started going through them methodically, the way I'd trained myself to do in my practice. Bank statements from Chase, investment statements from Fidelity, a folder labeled Estate Planning in my father's handwriting. I opened the folder. Inside was a copy of a will. The top page read, Last Will and Testament of Thomas Patrick Brennan, dated April 7th, 2022. I read it carefully. I, Thomas Patrick Brennan, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. I revoke all prior wills and codicils. I hereby bequeath my entire estate, including but not limited to my primary residence, located at 4782 Desert Vista Drive, Scottsdale, Arizona. My ownership interest in Brennan Climate Solutions LLC, all bank accounts, investment accounts, retirement accounts, and personal property, to Vanessa Marie Cortez, currently residing at the same address. No mention of me. No mention of Catherine. Not a single word. At the bottom of the page was my father's signature. It looked like a signature, but shakier, less controlled. The letters slanted wrong. Witnesses. 2 names I didn't recognize. Notary public stamp from Tucson. I photographed every page. Then I found another folder. This one labeled Dr. Morrison, Neurology. Inside were medical records, printed appointment notes. I started reading. January 2021. Patient presents with memory complaints. Wife deceased 2017. Patient reports increasing difficulty with recall, word finding, managing finances. Cognitive assessment performed. Results consistent with mild cognitive impairment. June 2021. Follow-up visit. Patient's symptoms progressing. Now meeting criteria for early-stage Alzheimer's disease. Started on Donepezil 5 milligrams daily. September 2021. Patient exhibiting confusion about recent events, difficulty with financial decisions, discussed need for durable power of attorney and possible guardianship. Recommend family involvement in care decisions. February 2022. Patient reports new romantic relationship with female companion significantly younger than patient. Discussed vulnerability to undue influence given cognitive impairment. Strongly recommend family be notified and involved in financial decisions. The will was dated April 2022, 2 months after that note. I photographed every page of the medical records. I was still at the desk when I heard the front door open downstairs. Footsteps, then a woman's voice. Tom, are you home? I got the groceries you wanted. I walked out of the office and down the stairs. A woman stood in the entryway holding 2 paper grocery bags from Whole Foods. She was pretty, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing yoga pants and a tank top. She saw me and froze. I said, I'm Catherine, Tom's daughter. She set the bags down slowly. She said, I know who you are. I said, and you're Vanessa. She said, yes. I said, you lived here with my father. She said, I took care of him. He needed someone. I said, you're 34 years old. She lifted her chin, defensive. She said, age doesn't matter when you love someone. I said, he left you everything in his will. She said, because he wanted to. Because I was the one who was here. Where were you? I felt my jaw tighten. I said, he had dementia, Alzheimer's disease. He wasn't competent to make that decision. She said, that's not true. He knew exactly what he wanted. I said, I have his medical records upstairs. They say he was vulnerable to undue influence. They say his doctor recommended a guardian. Her expression changed, just for a second. A flicker of fear. Then she recovered. She crossed her arms. She said, you need to leave. This is my house now. I said, no, it's not. That will hasn't been probated yet, and I'm going to challenge it. She laughed. Actually laughed. She said, good luck. Tom was clear about what he wanted. He told his attorney. He signed the will in front of witnesses. I said, his signature shows tremor and cognitive decline. I can prove it. She said, you can't prove anything. You're just angry because he chose me over you. I looked at her, young, confident, standing in my mother's kitchen like she owned it. I said, I don't need to prove he chose you. I need to prove he wasn't capable of making that choice. And I can. I'm an attorney. I specialize in elder law. I handle cases like this every week. Her face went pale, just slightly. She said, Get out. I said, I'll see you in court. I walked past her and out the front door. I got in my car. My hands were shaking so hard I had to sit for 5 minutes before I could drive. That afternoon, I filed an emergency petition in Maricopa County Superior Court. I requested immediate freeze of all estate assets pending resolution of a will contest. I cited my father's diagnosed cognitive impairment, the suspicious timing of the will, the significant age difference, the live-in relationship, and the medical documentation recommending against major financial decisions. The judge granted the motion the next day. Every bank account, every investment account, the house, the business, all frozen. Vanessa couldn't access a single dollar. She called me that night at 9:47 p.m., screaming, crying, threatening. I let it go to voicemail. I saved the recording. Her attorney, Douglas Pryor, called me the next morning. He sounded tired. He said, Ms. Brennan, we should discuss a settlement. This doesn't need to get contentious. I said, It's already contentious. My father was mentally incompetent. Your client exploited him. He said, That's a serious allegation. I said, I have serious evidence, medical records, expert witnesses, financial records showing transfers from his accounts to hers. He said, Ms. Brennan, litigation could take years. I said, I have time. He sighed. He said, What do you want? I said, I want her to relinquish all claims, completely. He said, That's not going to happen. I said, Then I'll see you in court. Discovery starts in 30 days. I'll be deposing your client. I'll be subpoenaing every text message, every email, every phone call. I'll be hiring a forensic accountant to trace every dollar. And when I'm done, the only thing she'll walk away with is a reputation as someone who preys on elderly men with dementia. He was quiet. Then he said, I'll talk to my client. If you're still here, you know where this is going. But let me tell you something about the legal system. It's not fast. It's not clean. It's a war of attrition. And the person who's willing to go the distance usually wins. Hit subscribe because what comes next took almost 2 years. The case went to formal litigation. I hired a probate attorney to represent me. Even though I'm an attorney, you don't represent yourself in something this personal. His name was Robert Cheng. He was 63, Harvard Law, 30 years of estate litigation experience. He charged $450 an hour. I didn't care. Discovery took 6 months. I subpoenaed everything. Vanessa's bank records, phone records, employment history, tax returns. My father's medical records, financial records, business records, personal correspondence. I hired a forensic accountant named Linda Kowalski. She traced every transaction between my father's accounts and Vanessa's. Over 3 years, $127,000 had been transferred. Cash withdrawals, Venmo payments, direct deposits labeled gift. I deposed Vanessa 4 times. She cried in the first deposition. She was angry in the second. By the third, she was coached within an inch of her life, answering every question with, I don't recall, or I'd have to check my records. I asked her how she met my father. She said at a coffee shop in 2015. I asked her what she did for work. She said she was between jobs, doing freelance social media consulting. I asked her to provide client names. She couldn't. I asked her when she moved into my father's house. She said 2020. I showed her utility bills with her name on them dating back to 2019. She said she must have been mistaken about the year. I asked her about the $127,000. She said it was gifts. My father wanted to help her. I asked her to show me thank you notes, emails, any acknowledgement of these gifts. She couldn't. Robert Cheng deposed the witnesses who'd signed the will. Both were employees at Douglas Pryor's law firm. Neither had met my father before the day he signed the will. Neither could attest to his mental state, beyond saying he seemed fine. We hired a handwriting expert. Dr. Martin Eisenberg, 40 years of experience, testified in hundreds of cases. He analyzed my father's signature on the 2022 will versus signatures from documents dated 2019, 2020, and 2021. His conclusion? The 2022 signature showed significant tremor, inconsistent letter formation, and loss of fine motor control, consistent with neurological decline. We presented my father's medical records. Dr. Harold Morrison, the neurologist, testified via deposition. He stated clearly, in February 2022, he documented that my father lacked capacity to make major financial decisions. and was vulnerable to undue influence. The will was signed in April 2022. Vanessa's attorney argued that my father was lucid when he wanted to be, that he loved Vanessa, that I was a bitter daughter who'd abandoned her father in his final years. I presented phone records. I'd called my father 63 times in the 12 months before he died. He'd answered 12 times. Average call length, 4 minutes. I presented emails. I'd sent 47 emails asking to visit, asking about his health, offering to take him to appointments. Most went unanswered. The ones he did answer were one-sentence replies. I'm fine, don't worry. I presented testimony from my father's business partner, Richard Ortega. Richard had known my father for 28 years. He testified that starting in 2021, my father became confused during business meetings, forgot details of contracts he'd negotiated, and eventually stopped coming to the office altogether. Richard testified that when he met Vanessa in 2022, my father introduced her as my friend and seemed uncomfortable, like he wasn't sure what to call her. I presented testimony from Ruth Castillo, the neighbor who'd found my father after his heart attack. Ruth had known my parents for 19 years. She testified that after my mother died, my father became withdrawn. She'd tried to check on him, but starting in 2020, a younger woman was always there. The woman, Vanessa, would answer the door and say Tom was resting. Tom was busy. Tom couldn't come to the phone. Ruth said she'd asked my father once if everything was okay. He looked confused and said, "Why wouldn't it be?" The case went to mediation in September 2024. Court ordered. The mediator was a retired judge named Patricia Voss. She listened to both sides for 6 hours. At 4:30 p.m., she called Robert Chang and me into a private room. She said, "Off the record, you have an overwhelming case. The medical evidence alone is devastating. But trials are unpredictable. Juries are unpredictable. Are you willing to settle?" I said, "For what?" She said, "What do you want?" I said, "I want her to walk away with nothing." She said, "That's not realistic. She'll fight. This'll go to trial. Trials are expensive." I said, "I don't care about the cost." Robert put his hand on my arm. He said, "Catherine, think about this. A trial could take another year. It'll cost you $200,000 in fees, maybe more, and there's always risk." I looked at him. I said, "What do you recommend?" He said, "Offer her nuisance value. 75, maybe 100,000. Make her sign a release and a non-disclosure agreement. You keep everything else. You move on." I thought about it. I thought about my mother. I thought about 43 years of my father's work. I thought about Vanessa living in my childhood home, sleeping in my mother's bed, spending money my parents had saved. I said, 75,000, final offer. She signs a full release and NDA. She never speaks about my father, the estate, or this case. Ever. Patricia went back to the other room. She came back 30 minutes later. She said, "They'll take it." The settlement was finalized in January 2025. Vanessa Cortez relinquished all claims to the estate in exchange for $75,000, roughly 3% of the total estate value. The settlement agreement included a non-disclosure clause. She can't talk about my father. She can't talk about the will. She can't talk about the case. If she does, she owes me $500,000. I haven't heard from her since. The house went to me. The business went to me. The investment accounts, the retirement accounts, the life insurance policy, all mine. I sold Brennan Climate Solutions in March 2025 for $1.4 million. I sold the house in April for $890,000. I didn't want either one. They didn't feel like mine. They felt like crime scenes. I donated $200,000 to the Alzheimer's Association in my father's name. I put the rest in a trust for my own estate planning. I'm 59 years old. I still practice law in Tempe. I still help families navigate the exact situation I went through. The difference is now, when I sit across from a daughter who's just discovered her father left everything to a stranger, I don't just tell her what to do. I tell her I understand. Because I do. Vanessa moved to California. I don't know where. I don't care. I never found out when their relationship really started. I never found out how they met. I never got answers to the questions that kept me awake at night. Did he love her? Did he forget about me? Did he know what he was doing when he signed that will? I'll never know. What I do know is this. My father built something over 43 years. A business, a home, wealth. He built it with my mother. She was his partner, his bookkeeper, his foundation for 38 years. Vanessa was there for 8. She was there when he was vulnerable, when he was declining, when he couldn't remember what he'd had for breakfast. She tried to take everything. I stopped her. Not because I needed the money. I have my own career. I make a good living. I don't need my father's estate to survive. I stopped her because it was wrong. Because my mother's memory deserved better than having a stranger inherit everything she'd worked for. Because 43 years of work doesn't get erased by a signature on a document, signed by a man who couldn't remember his own daughter's phone number. The legal system worked. Slowly, expensively, frustratingly. But it worked. I have the deed to the house now. Well, I had it. I sold the house, but I kept a copy of the final deed before the sale. It's in a fireproof safe in my office. It has my name on it. Catherine Elizabeth Brennan, sole owner. That's all I needed to see. My father's photo is still on my desk at work. It's an old one. He's maybe 55 in the photo, standing next to my mother at their 30th wedding anniversary party. They're both smiling. She's wearing a blue dress. He's wearing a suit. They look happy. That's the version of him I choose to remember. Not the man in the beach photo with Vanessa. Not the man who signed everything away to a woman young enough to be his granddaughter. Not the man who forgot his own daughter existed. I remember the man who built something. The man who loved my mother. The man who taught me that hard work matters. He's gone now. The Alzheimer's took him long before the heart attack did. But what he built didn't go to Vanessa Cortez. It went where it belonged. If you've ever had to fight for what was rightfully yours, you know this feeling. It's not satisfaction. It's not revenge. It's something quieter. Justice, maybe. Or just the knowledge that you didn't let someone rewrite your family's history. Drop a comment. Tell me your story. I read them all. Thank you for staying with me through this one. If this reminded you that the legal system can work when you know how to use it, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Check the description for another story about the will that changed everything. Hit subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.